Welcome back to Coast, everyone. We're having a conversation tonight with Michael Horn, researcher and official authorized media representative for Billy Meier. As we're learning, Billy Meier is, there's a lot to swallow on this one. It is one of the most controversial and enduring stories in all of ufology, a guy who claims to have had contacts for 60 or more years. And we're going to get into the types of proof that exists to support this story, also some of the most pointed criticisms of the story over the next couple of hours. Among the most interesting aspects of the Billy Meier case is prophecy. He claims to have made a number of different kinds of prophecies about everything from wars to AIDS to global warming, and we're going to look into those and see if we can in fact document that he made any of them and whether they came true or not. So we'll be right back with more of my guest Michael Horn on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast AM. We're talking with Michael Horn about the Billy Meier case, one of the most enduring and controversial cases in all of ufology. Michael, one of the most persuasive pieces of information that's contained in your new documentary, The Silent Revolution on Truth, is something you referenced a couple of minutes ago. This woman who, as a young girl, lived at this ashram, or was around in the ashram at the same time that Meier was there.
Yes.
And then as an adult, she somehow realizes that this guy in Switzerland, the same guy talking about UFOs, was the man that she met as a girl. Tell that story.
Well, yeah, that's very much the story. She tells it in a little more detail in the film. She explains, of course, the situation at the ashram and her grandfather, all the villagers. She had a woman who was also like, I guess, an assistant or almost like a nanny for her. I think the word she used was Aya. And there's a photograph with her, Aya, sitting looking out at these 8 hovering, UFOs over the ashram, and then Pobol goes through all the different photographs and explains where they were and who saw what, and how some people with her could see the UFOs and other people just couldn't quite see them. It sounded somewhat like that story. I think it's Magellan's ships on the horizon, and some of the native people could see the ships, or most of them couldn't because it wasn't in their paradigm, what have you. She talks about it going through a book that she was about to get rid of, and she decided to open it up and look there, and she's reading it, and she sees the ashram mentioned in there, and then she goes a little farther, and she goes, oh my gosh, this is the man. I knew him. And she had been, for your listeners so they know, she had in her adult life left all of the stuff that happened to her back at the ashram and all that she had seen and known very much behind her. She became after college, she became a diplomat for Cambodia, and she served in the United Nations. I think it was in the General Assembly for 14 years. And then she retired, and she's married, and she wasn't looking for fame and fortune or to be disturbed by people who want to know about UFOs. But she also was talking about how, as a little girl, this woman, Asket, would appear in her room late at night and would sit there while she was falling asleep, and sometimes Asket would just, stroke her hair, kind of a motherly kind of way. In the morning, she would wake up, and she felt she knew a lot more about things and people, and she didn't know why, but things had come to her in her understanding. But again, she put all this behind her until she rediscovered, by accident, the book, and through it, Billy. And it was through Wendell Stevens, who she contacted, sent a letter to Billy, and in no time flat, he wrote back saying, I've got to talk to this woman again. And they were reunited. She went back over there, I think, in 1998 or so, and spent time with Billy. And as she tells it in the film, we were up for 3 days and 3 nights because it was like a homecoming for us. And one of the things, without giving away too much, but I guess it's kind of obvious, one of the things that the consultant to the U.S. Army Special Forces, who, body language reader and all that, points out is that the woman presents herself in a certain way that would be enormously difficult unless she was extremely well rehearsed, and we try to figure out why. But if she was, that would be the only other way, other than that she's telling the truth. But again, we as I say, we bring in a therapist who talks about people with delusional disorders. We give time and space to the skeptic, and we have to give enough so people can have an out, and they can, have a sense of the pros and cons. But clearly, I'm an advocate for the case. I don't hide that or anything like that.
This expert on body language, I thought that was a real interesting touch. But he analyzed this lady. He also analyzed some videotape of Meier.
Yes.
And I thought he was less definitive in saying that, at least the comments I remember from the film, he was less definitive in saying that Meier is being absolutely truthful or non-deceptive. Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, I don't think exactly that you are. He had said the only qualifier for him, as I recall from the film, is that he said he blinks his eyes quite a bit, which could be an indication that he's not being truthful. But on the other hand, very intelligent people very often have a high blink rate, and based on his eye movements, he is, all things considered, he's being genuine. But of course, this guy, and I should tell you that our consultant didn't know what Meier was talking about. Because we first had him, I made sure that he only saw Meier and didn't even hear him in German. Then we had the volume turned up so he could hear it, and he said initially to me that he spoke German, but when we were playing, the footage of Billy speaking in German, he says, I don't understand that dialect because it's Swiss German. So he did not know at all what Meier was talking about. It was only later when we got to the Pobol Chang part of it, where the UFOs are coming up, that he has any sense of why we brought him in to look at this stuff. And you see him just as it was. I mean, we didn't say, okay, take two. We just shot it as we rolled the film on him.
Before we leave the story of the ashram, you have him in India, where that newspaper article referred to him as the UFO man.
Yeah.
And the significance of that being that he didn't just make this up as an old guy living in the Swiss hills, that he'd been telling these kinds of stories in public for a long time. What is in that article? What does it say? What does it tell about Billy Meier at that time in his life?
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I read the clipping. It had to do with something about a young man who's traveling around who claims that he has been meeting with extraterrestrials since he was a child, and that he had been to 3 planets, and that he was taking photographs in space or with them, things like this. So they were kind of telling his story up until his early 20s. He was relating that thing, but clearly in there he had put out very much as he has maintained all along, that he's meeting with extraterrestrials, that he goes on board their ships, that they take him places, etc. Now, here's a pretty natural question for the skeptics. How did Meier create those photographs in 1964 in the middle of nowhere with no models, no Photoshop, no film developing places around, and enlargers and things like that? Nobody addresses that. They want to attack his crystal clear stuff that is, quote unquote, too good to be true. But when you show the series of photos, as we do in there, of 1964 India, up to 8 craft hovering around the ashram, what does it take for people to get that this is a very, very, important event in human history? And the skeptics who have all along said, well, the fact that he has one arm now, that's no big deal. The 2-armed skeptics can never duplicate his photos. So I am always a little flabbergasted by the inability of people to deal with the 64 stuff.
Well, through the course of the evening, we're definitely going to get into questions that have been raised about the photos, as you certainly know. And I've heard from several of these skeptics, people you've had your own encounters with, and we'll get into that as well. I wanted to go back to something you mentioned when we were first speaking here about how you tried to trick Billy Meier.
Mm-hmm.
How did that work? What'd you do?
Well, I'm glad we're this far into the program, because a lot of people, if I started with this story too soon, they'd go, this guy's a total nutcase. And they may do that by the time we're done tonight, too. But here's what happened. About, I think it's 3 full years ago, going on 4 years ago, I was with Billy in his office, where we shot the interviews inside with him primarily in that little office, and there's just so much stuff in there. And it was only recently, in the past maybe 6 or 7 years, I think, that Meier got a computer, because